Okay, so I tried to record this video already, but the reality is I don't understand everything that goes on in his inventory implementation, and I was spending a lot of time trying to figure out as I go. That video would have been an hour long, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to basically just go through and give my understanding of what's going on, and we'll go from there. So I just want to demonstrate how the inventory system works initially, and then I'll go through the code roughly, and we'll go from there. So I can spawn items in here. You can place them anywhere. These three grids are the same. They're just copy paste of whatever the initial implementation was, and it's got a highlighter that works, highlights and shows you where that item is going to be placed. You can swap items. You cannot swap over two items. It knows if you're off the grid, if you're on the grid, if there's space for the item, yada yada. You've seen this in other games, so I was really happy that this turned out as it did. So in my case, it's a backpack. This is the only item with any logic on it: item, grid script, and grid interact. So the item grid script is representative of the actual visual representation of the inventory grid. Tile width and height. This is the size of your grid item, right? So each grid is a 50 pixel wide, 50 pixel height, and this needs to be set here so that you know what you're working with. Position on the grid is a vector2 representation of the position on the grid, as well as vector2 int tile grid position. I don't know why there's two. Inventory item, this is an array of the inventory item slots, so I can probably change this to slots. Oops. Apply. Hopefully that doesn't break anything. And this is the height and width of my grid that I've chosen, right? 7, 7. But this is set in the inspector. This is just to be set to something, and then the inspector variables override it. So on start, get the component rect transform of your grid, and then initialize your grid. Set your array, width and height based on width and height. Size is the width, right? So 7 in my case times 50. Height is 7 times 50. And size delta, so set the size of your grid. Get tile grid position. Grid anchor bottom left. These need to be also true, right? So the grid itself needs to have an anchor in the bottom left, and the pivot needs to be in the top left. So you're getting an XY representation of the inventory slot the mouse is on. Okay, cool. Yeah, so mouse position. So what am I hovering over, or what am I about to select? And that's returns your tile grid position. Item to select. So return used to highlight an item on the inventory. So if you're hovering over an item, highlight that item. Pick up the item. Inventory item slots. So picked item. So I generate, based on the XY component that I feed in here, an inventory item. Inventory item picked up. Picked item is representative of the slots that I'm on, right? Inventory item slots are XY. So when I pick up an item, I feed a XY into it, and then I pick up that item if the item is not null. And then I clear the reference of that item from those slots so that I can place that item back there. Again, I'm returning the picked item. Try to find a space for the item. Insert item. Item, insert item, insert random item. So this is a code that's being used right now when I press W. Whatever grid I'm hovering over, it tries to insert a random item. So this is not something, you don't want your players pressing W and then they're getting a random item. But insert random item can be done when I double click or whatever the case may be. I just need I need to have a selected item grid set in that case if I'm going to do that. So this isn't final implementation, but that's just what's happening there. and this is only being used there. Try to find space for item, and can fit item here. So it's two loops, or two for loops, nested for loops, whatever they're called, and it's cycling through the y, the height. Is there a height in there that equals, my item height? Is there a width in there that equals my item height? If that, if that's true, then look for a width that height, and then if that's true, then you can fit item. If you can fit item, then return that, and that's returning your vector2 position. And then you'll use that, right? Try to find space for item. Items to insert, and you're setting your position, your vector2 int position on grid. So that's the position that you want to insert, and you run this code to determine whether you can or not. Clear item reference from slot. Just when you pick up an item or get rid of an item, you need to clear the reference. Try place item. Can I place the item here? It takes an inventory item, in position X, Y, and a reference takes a reference of the overlap item. So that would be the item underneath your mouse if you're going to swap. If you can place the item here and there's nothing there, or I'm sorry, if you can't place the item, if it's false, then return false. If the slot is full, if the slot is not full, then your overlap item is null, and you can return false. So when is it true? Place item, true. Place item, return true. Okay. Place item. I don't know why I wouldn't return. Why am I even using it? When do I use this? Place selected item, bool complete. Oh, okay, to reset. Some of these names I adjusted, and they're making less sense to me as I read through it. But so what's happening here is I'm trying to place the item, and I'm using that to determine whether or not I have successfully placed an item, and if so, then I need to run some logic to clear and reset my selected items, overlap item, yada yada. I need to just basically get reset. So it probably could have been better to rename it something else. Place item. This is the logic to actually place the item, I believe, unless I named it weird again. Rect transform inventory item get component. So that's of this item grid. Set the parent of the rect transform. Oh, okay. So rect transform is the inventory item. Not in this case, it's the inventory item, and then I set the parent to this grid that I'm placing the item on. Set all occupied tiles as containing placed item. So the items, because they have different height and width, I need to run this to set all of the different grid spaces in there to equal this item, or have a reference of that item. Am I returning anything? No. Position X. So I set the reference here. On grid position, position X, position Y, vector2 position, calculate position on grid. And that's done down here, inventory item position X, Y. Okay. Local position, set to position. Right. Okay, so place the item. Set all the slots equal to it. Set the original position of the item, and then calculate the position to set all of the to determine the position of the item on that grid. Tile size width, tile size, inventory item. Return position. vector to position. Okay. There's some things here that I'm not understanding fully. I more or less know what they're doing, but why all the individual things are happening, maybe I don't understand that. So we'll move on. Bool is slot full. It's checking to see if a slot is full. What slot? Takes in a reference of an overlap item. Maybe I named these things weird. That's why it's being confusing to me. Anyway, this is checking if the slot is full in some way, for some reason. Can fit item, another check. You need, height, width, and where you're trying to place the item. Is item on inventory? This is going to be done to show if the highlighter or not. Can place item here. Okay. Can place item here. So that's going to need a mouse position and stuff. 2 references. Done in inventory controller and item grid. Return true. Return false. So if the item is not on the inventory, then just get out. If the item is not on inventory, return false. This is just here twice for no reason. I'm gonna leave it because it's not messing anything up, but I think this is if it's not on the inventory at all, and then if it's not fully on the inventory, because we do this addition here, then we also return false, because items have vector 2 dimension about them. Inventory item. This is a representation of the item in the inventory. You need a grid position XY. This, and you also need, you're going to set the item, and the item data SO is a scriptable object item data. So you're going to set the item data to this item data, and this is representing the item in the inventory. So you just need a way to access that. Get component image, setting the image. This is just set, so you're setting all the data. Destroy self. I put this in here in case I'm trying to add items to the inventory, but the inventory is full. Right now they're just destroying, so that needs to be changed to something else. This is the highlighter logic, the little white squares that it's not playing right now. I won't play it again, but this is to handle the highlighter, which is just a prefab, but right now it's actually in my scene. I could have it set as a prefab, I'm pretty sure, and just instantiate it, but for now it's fine to just, it's a 1x1 pixel. It can just be in the scene wherever. It hides itself immediately when the game starts, so that's fine. You need to set the size representative of the item that you're hovering over or trying to place. You need to set the position as well based on those variables. And this is a overload. So displace a highlight over the item in the inventory. Place a highlight whilst moving selected item. So 2 different set positions, and I didn't really understand how you could do this, but I more or less understand now. You can choose, right? If you just give it this, it's gonna. If you're just going to give a target grid and a target item, then it's just going to do this. If you're going to give it target grid, target item, and an int XY position, then it's going to run this code. Set parent, you need to set the parent. Right now I'm just setting the parent to the target grid component. So whatever I'm hovering over, that's what the highlighter parent needs to be. And then this is just used to show or hide in different scripts. So this is the big one, inventory controller. bulk logic, blah blah blah, placing, picking up, moving, swapping, place an item, empty game object in the scene, placed on empty game object in the scene. Okay, so that's what I did. I have an inventory control over here, and that's where this logic is being held. I made it a singleton. Oh god, did I just move something? I made it a singleton. Private item grid, selected item grid. This will be set on the grid interact. But whatever I'm hovering over, it's going to set that to the selected item grid. Item grid, selected item grid. This is a private get set. No, public, whatever. Public get set for the active inventory item. Get, if I'm just getting it, I selected item grid, I return that. Set, if I'm setting it, then equals the value. I don't understand this, right? Set, and then I just have value. I just have a of the value. So equals null equals item grid. So if I'm setting it, right, inventory selected item grid equals, so I'm setting it and then it's item grid. I'm setting it, so I guess this would be the value. And I also set the highlighter to the parent of the value, because that's handled dynamically as you hover over things. Selected item references, blah blah blah. List item data SO, list of items to spawn. This is just a list in my scene or on this item of all the different items that I can spawn randomly when I press W, not final implementation. Inventory highlight, reference, old position. This is used in for checks later on down, and so is this. I added this later to check. Awake, instance, whatever, singleton logic, inventory highlighter, get component, inventory highlighter. Done on awake because the inventory highlighter script and this script are on the same game object. Is that even true? Yeah, inventory highlighter. Rec transform, that's the reference to this item right here. Update. Dragging the item if there's an item. Q, W do different things. Q will put it on my mouse pointer. W will try to insert it into the inventory that I'm hovering over. And if the selected item grid is null, then don't show the highlighter. And handle the highlighter logic on update always. Get mouse button down, select inventory item. If I click, then select inventory item. And then logic in there to determine if I've clicked on anything relevant. Insert random item. Again, this is just when I press W, try to put an item in the grid that I'm hovering over. Insert item. This is more vague. Checks to see if the inventory has enough space. And I check that by doing this. So that this is doing this, but this is what really does it. And if position on grid is null, right? If my try to find space item has returned null, which is this, then no space for new item, and then I tell that item to destroy itself, because I did instantiate the item. Or did I? Item to insert, inventory item, insert item. Yeah, probably when I'm using that later. And if it did not return null, right, I just return if it returns null, and then I place the item if it did not return null on the position, which I've determined by try to find a space for the item. Handle highlighter. This is highlighter logic here. So where should the highlighter show? If the old position is the position on grid, right? If where my mouse is also the old position, then just get out of here. Don't do anything. And same with the old grid. If the old grid is the same and the position is the same, then don't do any of this. Yeah. So if the position is the same and the selected item, because this is happening all the time. Handle highlighter is happening in update all the time, so just get out of here if you don't need to update anything. Otherwise, set the old position to the position on the grid and set the old grid to the selected item grid. I needed to add this because I had different grids and the highlighter wouldn't show correctly, so I now have a reference to the old grid. And if it's the same, then don't worry about anything. Otherwise, set it to the new grid. If selected item equals null, item to highlight. If I don't have a selected item, I'm not holding an item, then highlight the item that I'm hovering over. If item to highlight is not null, then show the highlighter. right? So only show the highlighter if I'm over an item, and set the appropriate size and position of where and how large to highlight. Otherwise, don't show the highlighter. And this is this. If it's null, if it's not null, then go ahead and show if I have an item. Yeah. Okay, so if I'm holding an item, then show it and show where I'm hovering over. Create random item. Again, this is just a temporary thing, although it could be implemented in different ways. When I press W, instantiate the item, which is just an item prefab. Set the stats. That happens when that item loads. It's on set or whatever. Selected item. Select, and I use this on queue. Yeah, I'm not returning anything. So inventory item, get component rect transforms, set the parent, set the sibling. Okay. So I generate an empty prefab. That's my selected item. This is being used when I press Q. It goes on my mouse cursor. This is just what happens. When I use Q, I just do this. If I use W, then it does more logic on top of it. So create random item. It's on my mouse cursor. It's empty. I set the parents. I set the as last sibling, so it's hovering above everything. And then I set the I choose a random item from my list of my list of all items, and then I run the set on that selected item ID. Select inventory item. So what am I hovering over? If I'm hovering over something, then pick it up. Otherwise, place it. No. If I have an item, if I don't have an item, then pick up an item. If I have an item, then place the item. Or you're going to try. Get tile grid position. Where's my mouse? Place selected item. Will complete. Try to place the item. If that's true, then reset the stuff. Pick up selected item. Pick up the item on this XY position. If it's not null, right? So if I set it here, this is true. If this is successful, then I change the parent and last sibling and everything, so it's now rendering in front of everything. Item icon drag, rect transform position. So this is happening if I have a selected item. If I'm holding an item, then it's moving with my mouse. Prevent window drag. If I have a selected item, or I have a selected item grid. So if I'm hovering over a selected item grid, or if I'm holding an item, I don't want you to be able to drag the window by clicking. Set selected item parent. This may be redundant with how I've done stuff earlier, but actually, yeah, it is. It has 0 references, so unused. Blah blah blah. Grid interact. So this is pretty simple. Now I don't understand this. Required component type of item grid interact. So it's here, right? It's on, and it requires item grid, right? Yeah. Automatically adds required components as dependencies. Okay. I'll play with that later. I don't really understand it. As far as it's just requiring that an item has an item grid on it. Pointer enter handler, pointer exit handler. On awake, grab your references. On pointer enter. So when I hover over a grid, right, and this script is on the grid, when I hover over the grid, I set the inventory controller I have a reference to it, but my inventory controller is a singleton, so I don't need to do it that way. Which I was doing here, but I already had a reference to it. I'll leave that. Anyway, when I hover over a grid, I set inventory controller selected item grid to this. Otherwise, I set it to null. Okay, so that's my admittedly lacking understanding of how this inventory system works in its entirety. But I just wanted to do that because to reinforce my understanding of it. You know, obviously there are things that I don't understand, so that's what I wanted to find out. Do I understand it? What don't I understand about it? In case I encounter more issues in the future using it. I didn't like the idea of just copy pasting, which I didn't, right? I went through with him and I coded it, but it was just, he says do this, I do that, you know what I mean? So it's here, but it's not mine, and I don't fully understand it, so I wanted, you know, I'm going to have to understand it to an extent in case I run into issues in the future, so I don't have to just keep asking other people, why isn't this working, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so weird video, I guess, but I think it was good for me, and that's why I made it, so okay, bye.